Here is your vocab for lesson 1. We have 2 important vocab words that we're going to be using all unit, and that's squares and square roots. So first we're going to start by talking about squares. So you can see that it looks like this. We got x and then this little 2 at the top right corner. So we read it as x squared. That's the most common way of saying it. And then you could also say it as x to the second power. Now, just for clarification, the number doesn't have to be a 2. We have x to the third power. We can have x to the fourth power. We could have x to the 100th power. But for it to be a square, this number has to be a 2. So these are other, what we call exponents. And we'll talk about those later in this school year, but we're starting with just squares. So when we do square something like 3 squared, that's just doing that number times itself, the big number times itself. We got 3 times 3. And that just comes from the concept of squares. So if we have a square, squares have the same side length. So if we had a 3 length and a 3 length, that means we could split it into 3 rows and 3 columns. And then if you count up the squares or multiply, that'll give you your answer. So we have 3 times 3 is 9, so 3 squared is 9. We can also do this with negative numbers. So we have negative 3 squared. So it'd just be negative 3 times negative 3, which a negative times a negative is a positive. So we would get positive 9. Then another example, we have 4 squared. So 4 squared would be 4 times 4. And that would be 16. And then negative 4 squared would be negative 4 times negative 4, which would also be positive 16. So now that brings us into our other word, which is square roots. So square roots are the inverses or the opposites of squares. So just like we talked about addition and subtraction being opposites and multiplication and division, squares and square roots are also opposites, so they can undo the other. So a square root looks like this. It's got like kind of like a check mark with a line over the top. Kind of looks like a weird division symbol, but that is what your square root symbol looks like. And we just read that as the square root of x. Sometimes you will see a little 2 here. This might be important for if you're using a different calculator. You might see a little 2 sitting on top of the little check mark. Know that they are the same thing. We just don't usually put the 2 if we don't have to. So if we look down here, the square root of 9 is really just asking you what number, if we squared it, would give us the answer of 9. So if we look over here, when we did 3 squared, we had the answer of 9. So 3 is an answer. But also when we did negative 3 squared, we got the answer of 9. So negative 3 is also the answer. So that this 2 means we can have up to 2 answers. So in this lesson, we will have 2 answers. And then also for the square root of 16, we look over here, 4 squared gave us the answer of 16. So 4 is one of our answers, and negative 4 squared gave us the answer of 16. So negative 4 would also be an answer. So that's your vocab for lesson 1. Now you are ready to take your notes.